Welcome to The Last American Vagabond. I'm happy to be telling you we're having Brook Jackson back on today to discuss the update of her case, something that you guys know we've been following for a very long time, interviewed her 3 times, I think, so far, and the case has been evolving since then. But as you remember, to avoid going back through all of it, and maybe Brook will want to get into it to start a little bit, but I think the reality is simply that she had called out Pfizer and Ventavia right in the beginning when she was involved with that, and ultimately proved, and I don't use that word lightly, proved, with the data she presented, the information she has, that they were lying, that there was falsified information and so many other things. If she would like to touch on it, it's up to her. It's obvious that they got caught lying. Now, there's so many angles of the Pfizer conversation that everybody out there is aware of. All the different lies that were sold. And I think we can now prove deliberate, like well aware that they were lying for whatever reason you want to fill in. And ultimately, this has come to part, change of administration now. And I see a lot of the same things happening. And I think it's important to discuss the update of her case as it changes over into a new administration. And as we see new things like Stargate platforms and different mRNA shots and the conversation of what's changing and where it may be going. So Brooks is here today to discuss the update of the case and the current landscape of the health field and vaccination and where it seems to be going. So Brooke, thank you for joining me again. How are you?
Thanks for having me, Ryan. Good. Thank you. It's our 3rd interview.
I believe it's our 4th, actually.
Is it our 4th?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I was thinking. So we did the first one where where you broke down all the original information. Then we followed up on basically when Pfizer, I think it was when they were in court, and I have that clip actually from Barnes saying that, where they basically argued that it's not fraud if the government knows we're lying, like we're working together. That was like their actual argument in court. Yeah. And then I think we followed up on just, kind of catching up on where we were. And, so your work has been so profound in this conversation, starting with the British Medical Journal, which, I mean, it right then showed you how amazing it is, how propaganda that basically they referred to it suddenly as a health blog. One of the most profound, important, influential platforms suddenly becomes a health blog because they dared to call out what you were talking about or highlight it, And so this has been such a profound, just a profound part of this ongoing conversation. And I really just want to shout you out for that work because it was brave and clearly it has effects on your life. So I don't know if you want to get into any of the background. Did you want to talk about it? Because my audience is well aware of it. If you wanted to give any kind of a starting, understanding of what you went through beforehand, it's up to you.
Sure. I mean, just quickly, just in case, any of your new viewers aren't aware, I was a regional director for a company named Ventavia Research Group who was conducting Pfizer's phase 3 clinical trial for their COVID shot. And while I was there, which was a very brief 18 days, I saw what this company and what Pfizer was allowing the company to do in falsifying data, not recording all adverse events that patients were experiencing during their participation in the study. And after, those few weeks of trying to get my company and Pfizer to do the right thing, pause the study, make sure that we exclude the data from any analysis of the overall safety and efficacy, I contacted Pfizer, I did contact Pfizer and contacted the FDA at the end of September, and that resulted in me being terminated on the spot. Right. So that's the background of what I saw during my oversight of the clinical trial. After doing a little bit of research and looking at data that was coming out in the New England Journal of Medicine and viewing the FDA advisory committee meetings on the emergency use authorization, I realized right away that they did not exclude my company's data. And so because this was a product that was funded with American taxpayer dollars, I knew that I had what we call a False Claims Act. Mm-hmm. And so for the last almost 5 years now, I've been trying to recover our money for a product that's not safe and effective. Right. So there's the background.
Yeah. Well, and remember, and this is really important, that this was your first interview with TLAV, and I believe it was the first one in general. And all the information down below you can find for yourself. It's all the direct source documents to documentcloud.org, all like literally the receipts that she came with right in the beginning that prove everything she was saying. And I'm still actually pretty blown away by how I mean, that's one of many experiences I've had through this process of doing this for the decades yes I have. Where you recognize, okay, we live in a corrupt society. Like the fact that you can have exactly everything on receipts showing that they were lying, that they were covering it up, and yet nothing actually happens shows you everything. And then, of course, we followed up, and that was when more information came out, reveals concerns with data integrity, vindicating your previous claims. And then in 2023, Pfizer trial reveals big pharma seen as too big to fail, which is one of the interesting kind of evolution or, evolving points around it. But thank you for the quick.
Okay, Ryan. So you're right. It is our fourth interview. I admit I was wrong. See, Pfizer, how easy that is.
Yes, there you go. Yeah, but obviously when Pfizer is, I mean, that's where, just since I mentioned it, let me play this real quick. This was just the clip that I had cut last time, I think. This is Barnes speaking with Eva Frey about the case. And remember, this is Brook's lawyer. So he's speaking about the case, and this is what he had to say. And this is the reality. It's insane that they could have the argument that the government's involved, so it's not fraud.
Present Brook Jackson, who is a whistleblower who exposed that the Pfizer clinical trials were riddled not only with error, but with fraudulent and false certifications to the U.S. government. What's fascinating is Pfizer has moved to dismiss the case, and their grounds to dismiss, as they repeated in the scheduling conference we had this week, is that it doesn't matter if they submitted fraudulent certifications to the government. It doesn't matter if they submitted false statements under penalty of perjury to the government. It doesn't matter if they lied about the safety and efficacy of these drugs mislabeled, in my opinion, as vaccines. Because the government was in on it with them. The government knows what's going on, and the government still would have given them the check anyway. So is it really fraud if the government's their co-conspirator? That is, in essence, Pfizer's defense so far to the case.
That was just the opening right there for TLAV. But yeah, I mean, go ahead. You have a comment?
No, I was just going to say that's crazy. And my hair actually looks exactly like Viva's today. It's so cute. I mean, it was an incredible defense. I don't even know what to say. I've run out of ways to explain,
right,
just how absurd this is. And
That's
again,
correct.
Here we are 5 years, 5 years later, and we're still not just fighting against Pfizer now. It's Brook Jackson versus the United States of America.
Right.
I'm not suing Pfizer now. Now I'm arguing that the Justice Department has violated. So we can get into that a little bit more, but I don't even know how to explain it, Ryan.
Yeah, well, I mean, to your exasperation, I mean, this is what I'm getting at. Is it's like, I think we all deep down like have this at least hope, maybe a belief, but I think mostly a hope today that this is not the way the world is. That this is not all the power structure or all the people out there in white lab coats or in government or lawyers or whatever it is, where you're just going like, I don't want to believe that it's this, because the only way something like this can happen the way it has been is if I think more, if, at least in the power structure, that at least the vast majority are not honest. I mean, I don't know how else to see that. And so it's really a difficult, almost like cognitive dissonance to be like, I guess that's the way it is. And then every day I get in my shows where I'm going like, I don't understand. And then I think to myself, yeah, I do. I know it's like, but you want to look for something that explains why it's not what it appears to be, so it's incredibly frustrating. But thank you again for putting yourself out there. And I mean, a lot of negative things comes around, especially this large of a conversation, calling out multi-billion-dollar companies. But so let's bring this to the point. So beyond all of that, a lot has been continuing. You've been continuing your efforts to call this out, to have some kind of accountability for the lies that you've proven over and over. In court, they argue that it doesn't matter, that our fraud's okay because the government's involved, in essence, as even Barnes was kind of paraphrasing that was what they actually argued. So this brings us to where we are today, where now we've seen, the argument being at least hope, I guess, in some minds, that this was largely the Biden administration, or that the current administration, left or right, that they were the ones that were really doing this. I mean, let's remember that this started with Trump's Operation Warp Speed. And again, my opinion for those new to this is it's just the U.S. government. I don't think there's a difference left and right when it comes to the core agendas. And so it was rolled out Warp Speed. It handed the baton to Biden's administration, and it got worse. But I argued it would have no matter who was in that position. And now we have a new administration, and the hope is that this would go in a different direction. I personally think we've seen kind of a lot of the same, and even worse, Stargate, so on. We could talk about that if you'd like. But so now we have the point of hoping things are different. So let's discuss, let's first start with the actual lawsuit, where it is today. So give us the updates from the last we spoke to today, and like as you said, why it's now shifted away from the focal point it had and now just on the U.S. government in general, and then we can get into what you're seeing in the current administration.
Sure. Well, just so your audience knows, I completely agree with everything that you said. I think the baton was just handed off. I don't. I mean, obviously, I follow politics, but I don't care one way or another. To me, we talked about this a few minutes ago. It's like blue versus red. It's same team, different color. That's kind of been my view for as long as I can remember. But where we left off, I guess when you just played the clip, that was Pfizer's argument. We knew that the fraud existed, but it was okay because the government said it was fine. However,
really quickly, even better, I think Viva Frey said before that we gave them the fraud they ordered, or something like that, which is a really interesting way to think about it.
Yeah, Sasha Latipova actually did a talk, and that was her mic drop moment. We didn't commit, or we didn't order the fraud, or however she explained it, but it's great if you want to find it and show everybody. But that was Pfizer's argument. The Department of Justice, after Pfizer made that statement, came in with their own statement of interest and actually disagreed with Pfizer and wrote out that while our legal theory was a possible way to induce a contract, we didn't spell it out that way in our complaint. So real long story short, we were dismissed in district court, and based on the government's statement of interest, we asked the judge to give us another opportunity to amend the complaint so we could highlight the word fraud or phrase fraud in the inducement. So our claim is that based on Pfizer's clinical trial, the fraud, everything that I've claimed, that fraud induced the contract and subsequently the emergency use authorization was given. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's a fraud in the inducement theory. And the government, under Biden at the time, gave us the instructions on how to file this claim appropriately to hold Pfizer accountable.
And so that was when this is when basically I think you put the caption out showing that the email said that they were interested in the DOJ was interested in going after Ventavia. Is that what you're referring to?
So that was actually during the first 12 months that the lawsuit was under seal. So the way that False Claims Acts work, when you file a complaint, it goes under seal, and the government does that so not to tip off the defendant. So it stays under seal. No one's supposed to discuss that there's a lawsuit, and that's what eventually led me to seek out the Peter Doshi and the BMJ and get this information out, because that was my way to inform people of the way these clinical trials were run without revealing that there was an actual lawsuit against Pfizer. I just wanted people to have that opportunity to understand. Yes, there were sloppy things that went on at my trial sites, but when you understand how clinical trials work, and when FDA is reviewing data, these percentages, although mine only represented 4, 3, 2, whoever you want to believe % of the overall study, it certainly could have affected what FDA requires to get products authorized and approved. So that's been just an argument that I'm tired of having with people. If you don't understand clinical trials and you don't understand, efficacy and endpoints and all these things that matter, then you can't just say, oh, it was just 3 sites in Texas. Who gives a care?
And there's also much on top of that, which I think we discussed in one of the previous interviews, is it's not just, well, first of all, as I think you argued, clearly this is not just a one-off accident. There's many different actions and choices that were made that signify, that indicate a much larger decision-making process being broken or fraudulent or lying, whatever. But then on top of that is the reality that they actively covered it up. And you could prove that with what you showed. They were hiding and deleting things. And so there's a level of criminality or dishonesty that is clear in all that. And if that doesn't matter to people out there, then, to me, people making those arguments are people that have a clear agenda or a side they're choosing, and they feel like that's brushing up against it. That's the partisan game today from both sides. So I agree with you completely. This matters. I mean, even if it's exactly what their argument claims, how does that not matter? It's still a level of dishonesty or fraudulent activity that, as you're saying, could have even a small effect. But your picture,
it belongs fraud, whether it's a little or a lot, has no business around our drug approval process, period.
Absolutely.
So anybody defending that is immediately just discounted. We don't have time for any of that. Where were we? SEAL, went to the British Medical Journal as a way to kind of get information to the public and for them to be able to make a fully informed decision. Right. My attorneys at the time told me, you can't do that. If you tell people that there's, that this went on or that there's a lawsuit, the government's going to come after you. And I said, well, listen, this was probably around September when the military mandates were starting to roll out. Y'all hear that? It's thunder.
Yeah, I can't hear that.
Lights flicker. That's why we have some storms going through Dallas. But right around the time that the military mandates were being illegally ordered on our troops, and right around the time that the emergency use was being considered for adolescents, those 12 to 15-year-olds. And my children fell within that age range. And I just said, to my attorneys, the government can make as many threats as they want to. Let them come after me, but this is unacceptable. People deserve to know how these trials were run. And, that data belongs to us. We paid for it. We paid for these clinical trials. Our tax dollars did. And I just, that really just bothers me a lot.
Yeah. Well, I mean, imagine had, Doshi, shout out in general, I haven't followed up. I'm curious what has changed in his life because of that. But clearly, had that not happened,
nothing. It was actually, that I'd followed Doshi's work, calling for transparency in clinical trials.
Right.
There's a whole, we could talk for hours about FDA and, clinical trial failures. And we'll probably get into that a little bit with, this new gold standard requirement for placebo controls in vaccine trials. But, it wasn't him. It was, Paul Thacker who did the investigation. Right. Everything that I gave them was, verified, and, I was background checked and all that good stuff. It was a peer-reviewed article. Right. And still, I think today, the second most downloaded BMJ article.
Right. Which shows you everything. I mean, it's because, this is every time this happens, that shows you the average people want that truth. And every time it shows you they're trying to keep these things away. But shout out to both Thacker and Doshi for putting themselves out there. My point was, had that not happened, had you followed the direction of the lawyers, whether right or wrong, people wouldn't even know about this. Think about trying to fight this without having the kind of momentum and following and people that are trying to help you. That's what the government wants, because then there's no real accountability. They can just toss you to the side. No one cares.
So the whole time it's under seal. The Department of Justice is telling me that they're investigating this. They're people that are DOJ that are considering actual criminal charges against Ventavia. And, then I just couldn't, it was like they were just yanking my chain, seriously. And it was, I believe, in an attempt to get this stuff into as many arms as they possibly could, while keeping me, it's like they were giving me a snack and I'm waiting on the full course. We're going to hold this clinical trial company responsible. And then we're going to hold Pfizer responsible and everybody else who was involved. So,
and what year are we at right now? Where you're talking about this? What year are we at?
So this is 2021.
Okay.
So after BMJ article came out that was November of 2021. Very shortly after that, the Department of Justice made the decision to decline to intervene. So at that point, they were investigating the allegations, supposedly. They could have intervened and taken over the litigation of the case, the entire case, or they could have moved to dismiss the case if they felt that it lacked merit, or they could have done what they did, and that was decline to intervene, which allows me, the whistleblower, the relator, to move forward with the case on my own. And that's what I chose to do. So they stayed out of it. They wanted to be updated on any, progress that was being made. So we said, okay, we'll do that. And then, so what is that? That's 22. So February of 22, they made that decision. And then for the next, 2+ years, I'm in court arguing Pfizer, and Pfizer's blaming it on the government and saying it didn't matter. There may have been fraud, but it was just a little bit. It didn't matter. And the judge isn't having that. I feel like we were really close to showing, which time did that. This case, I guess, has taught me, one, friendship, the value of that, right? Because I made some amazing friends, you included, and patience, because, we didn't know everything that we know today when I filed this lawsuit. So patience is certainly something that I'm happy to have learned a little bit.
A lot has come out since then. I mean, people, I think it was clear early in this conversation, but there's so many other things going on in the world right now, and every day there's still more information coming out. I think you just referenced who was it? Somebody I greatly respect him. I can't remember the name now, but he had another study. McKernan put out another study showing the contamination. And it's like every day these major developments from peer-reviewed science, and people just falls by the wayside. So just adding to your point, like it has only gotten more clear that this is a bigger problem.
Yeah, when they stop hiding things and censoring people, I mean, it's coming to light. We are actually following the science now.
Right.
And one thing that Kevin kind of pointed out not too long ago is that there's not a consensus. It's an ongoing process. We're always learning. Science evolves.
That's the definition of science, right? It's a never-ending pursuit of truth.
I appreciate that. And it's okay to be wrong. It is.
Right.
But it needs to be okay to say that out loud. And that's what we haven't been able to do.
Yeah. I agree.
Well,
so bringing this into, so after 2022, really just more so like, let's just say like around the time of changing over from the administrations. So you're still fighting this. So is there any more updates from that point to now that changed before we get into, really the hope and what's happened in regard to the new administration before we go to that?
Yeah, not really. I mean, Pfizer arguing that it didn't matter. We saying that it did. DOJ saying, yes, it certainly could matter. Here's what we would like to see you, potentially claim. And it's all just legal stuff. It's like format, and they wanted us to highlight things, and it's just really, really dumb. So we did that. And it wasn't until we actually laid out the complaint the way that the Department of Justice instructed us to, that they decided to make a move to dismiss the case.
That's interesting.
So they've had since January 8th of 2021 to dismiss this case if they felt that it was, again, not a case that is likely to be successful. They could have done that. They call it merit. It didn't. It's not that it didn't lack merit. It certainly did. Or they could have claimed national security. I mean, they could have dismissed for a bunch of reasons. They chose not to. I think in a hope that Pfizer's bigwig attorneys were going to beat my attorneys in court, and they couldn't. We were winning, and either administration. Biden's or Trump's, they could not afford discovery. Not that it's going to cost a lot to get that, it certainly will, but what it would expose either party.
Right. All of it is, the U.S. government and everybody else included. And yes, that's something like David Martin, for example, has pointed out a lot. This is an all-encompassing problem. And so, so what's crazy to me that you pointed out right there is that literally they say, do it like this, to have whatever, to be more effective, to get more and then you do it like that. And then that's what, it seems clear that the way you even explain this, and based on the information you had to begin with and the overlapping incestuous relationship with these companies and the government, that this, in my opinion, was clear that that was just the excuse, or rather maybe recognizing that you were going to have more traction than he wanted to remove this. And so all of it's dishonest, in my opinion. And so this was a post you put out on April 28th, where you say DOJ claims Pfizer's vaccine is effective. So we're coming all the way back around, and now this is in the Trump's DOJ. And so explain this, and I have the actual document here where I'll just show where it says, and in the FDA's view, Pfizer's vaccine is effective, which, I mean, look, let's be real. Fundamentally, that's not true. You can prove that today with the peer-reviewed science. So just give me your thoughts on that, and then we can go into the point where, I mean, you say that Trump sides with Pfizer on this. And I think it's an important thing to get into and explain why you think that and what that means to the, again, the hope that things might have been different with this new administration, and your thoughts on, how that, contextualize that for us. Is Trump being played? How do you think that's playing out?
Yeah, so after we filed this amended complaint, we're winning in court. The DOJ comes in and says, okay, we can't have this. We have to get rid of this case.
Yeah.
And the way that they did that was based on a SCOTUS ruling in 2023. It was a False Claims Act case. And you can look at it, Ryan. I'm sure you'll want to. It's a case Polanski, and so in that case, and how the DOJ was able to move into my case is by claiming that based on this SCOTUS ruling in Polanski, that the government can do whatever it wants to do. Period. They think they have this unfettered right to just jump in at any point in any case and dismiss it if they don't like it.
This is interesting to me. Now, it's important to me that this is not seen as a partisan conversation today, because I think we both agree this is a government issue from all sides of it. But I do notice an interesting shift today in at least the presentation in a lot of different factors from the current administration, of just sort of being like, we have the power to do X, Y, and Z, regardless of whether it's unconstitutional, and just like asserting that from an executive branch dynamic. And so do you notice a difference between the shift from administrations to where at least the way they're engaging with you like that? Comparatively?
No.
The same, just dismissal. Because it sounded as if it was more so like they're asserting more of an ability to say we can get rid of whatever we want, versus before maybe being more, tactful. But either way, it's the same outcome is the point. So it's just
exactly. So that would be the reason that I say no, right?
Yeah.
I think the goal was the same.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so then
that was their basis for dismissal, that we have this unfettered right to come in to any case and dismiss it if we don't like it. And unfortunately, the district judge in Texas, and the fifth district, where is that? It's Eastern District of Texas. Sorry, agreed with the government that they do have this right. So my case was dismissed. And so fast forward to where we are today. We filed an appeal with the Fifth Circuit, and we just got a response from the government just a few days ago. And they're still claiming, I have to get my notes here, Ryan, because it's so absolutely ridiculous, their reason for wanting this case to remain dismissed. That the burdens of discovery, I don't know if you have this up and want to pull it. I think you started 2 minutes ago. The burdens of discovery, they believe the case lacks merit, and the case does not align with public health policy. So those were their three.
Is this in the ruling, the court document I pulled up? Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I can pull it back up if you want to show it in there. But yeah, that's an incredible statement. right? So what the argument
I
being?
think it's on page 19, Ryan.
Okay.
If you'll go there.
That's where it was. Yeah. So what was read it out again? The burden. What'd you say?
Yeah. So right there. So the government explains that.
There we go. The
government
government explained that discovery and litigation obligations associated with the case would place significant burden. You know, this argument kills me. The idea that, like, so even if it's a crime, they've made similar arguments in the past where, yes, this may be a problem, but because this, or here's a good overlap to the globalist dynamic of saying that, well, we need to stop using oil and different things, but we're going to allow ourselves to do it because national security, or in this case, saying that the burden would be too hard on the companies or the FDA, HHS, Department of Justice, but we're going to do it, allow the bad thing because otherwise it would hurt the system that's allowing the bad thing.
It blows my mind. Actually, start up a little bit. After the ROA 4526-27, it says first, the FDA was aware. Okay, right there. You can start there.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So they're saying that the FDA was aware of what I reported. Well, duh. I filed a complaint with them. Right, I written and I spoke to someone at FDA for an hour plus, let her know about everything I was seeing. So certainly they know, but our argument is, what did you do with that knowledge?
Mm-hmm.
Did you investigate these clinical trial sites? Did you exclude? What did you do? So they failed to give us any kind of evidence. FDA refuses to go on the record and say that they investigated the allegations, that it was not material to their decision to approve this stuff. The government explained that it has had continued access to Pfizer's clinical trial data. That's funny because remember how many years they wanted to hide that from the American people?
Right.
We would have all been dead by the time Pfizer and FDA got around to showing the American people who paid for these trials and these products what the evidence actually showed.
Well, this is what's so frustrating to me about this. When I saw this statement, you put this out on Twitter on the 28th, and you said Trump sides with Pfizer. DOJ explained to the court that it has continued access to the Pfizer trial, and they're saying it's effective. So to me, and let me know if I'm off base here. It sounds like they're trying to argue that, not without saying it, that yes, the data before did look bad, but we've had continued access to it, and now we've decided because of all the full data that you can't see that it is effective. Is that essentially what they're trying to argue with that?
Aren't vaccines supposed to be safe and effective?
Yeah, right. They're
excluded.
That's obvious. Getting rid of the one that probably matters the most in that conversation. But to me, it just seems like they're trying to argue with data that now we don't have access to, that it is effective, when we can literally prove to this day that that's not the case. So do you think? So give me your breakdown on that as it applies to the new administration, right? So this is the same thing in your mind, right? Is there any difference? Is there any, light at the end of the tunnel you're seeing?
Not. I mean, absolutely not. The Biden administration had access to the same data that Trump does. It's the same position. Nothing has changed.
Why do you think that is? I mean, let's, in the sense of like, look, I can be the first to point out that, or like everyone else would in the hope here that RFK Jr. does have a lot of fantastic and amazing work before. I think a few things that if you want to get into, we can, that I think are wild deviations, but I will still point to his work forever. That was monumentally important, that had a positive impact. And so I had hope that, and still maybe do, that there might be some positive change, or Trump has said things in the past that seem to align with a different direction. And so do you think there's any chance that they're being played, or there's something else going on? Or do you think it's just, as we said earlier, the, new boss, same as the old boss kind of a dynamic?
Well, I do feel that, right? But I also know, I have hope, first of all, but I also know that with Kennedy being in the position that he's in, and the appointments that are being made within, NIH and CDC and FDA, that we will be a healthier America for the next few years based on what they're doing and the changes that they're making to what they're able to. But when a product's on the market that they know it doesn't work. Right. But worse, they know that it's hurting people. This is not something that is just going to go away once it's recalled. We're talking about a product that's going to affect generations.
Right.
And there's no excuse. So how can you have a little bit of good without trying to stop the bad? It just doesn't work for me.
Yeah.
But they're good things. They're good changes. And these people that I know are in this administration have been trying to get these things done for decades. So maybe it's a win for them that these things are happening. It's a loss for the American people that other things are not.
Yeah.
And I just want us to not forget that.
Yeah. What I think is so important at this is we need to pull away from the partisan left, right, he's guilty, they're on your, all that should be, obviously those are relevant things to consider. But when you're coming down to something like we're talking about, like, okay, so this just happened. They're clearly going in the same direction, whatever the narrative change, whoever somebody's being played, the point is it's there and it's happening. Like, that's what we can all agree on, right? So the problem is that we tend to try to manufacture reasons to why it's different, or this might go a different direction because we want to believe in someone versus the other, and I just think that's dangerous. It is still happening, and like you said, like, I can understand the logic behind an argument around why, like from a trying to maybe like a greater good dynamic for why you might argue these things should be allowed, but I'm not okay with that. And I don't think anybody should be when we're talking about something that we all know is hurting people and is continued to, and that we know and can prove, again, pointing at David Martin's work, for example, that they knew what they were doing. And so I don't think there's any valid argument, moral or political or otherwise, that justifies allowing that to keep being used. And one more point about the liberty and freedom of choice. This is a very different dynamic. If this was something growing in the field, that's a different conversation. This is a manufactured product with U.S. tax dollars that they're in many ways mandating. So yes, pulling that off, it's like pretending arsenic being sold at stores is somehow, well, it's their choice. No, you're killing people, So that,
yeah, and you see that shift, they're like, oh, President Trump doesn't believe in mandates. Well, cool. But why does he believe that allowing a product to stay on the market to benefit who?
Right.
Who's being helped here?
Right.
Big Pharma's checkbook, I guess. I don't know. I don't have the answers for why this is being allowed. But at what point does it become the people's responsibility to actually stand up and do something? I don't know what that looks like, and I'm not saying that we need to have some kind of violent revolution, but we have to do something. The people have to do something, and I think all of us have a responsibility to do that. Whether it's local government, writing, doing these podcasts, whatever it is, whatever your thing is, just keep doing it. We have to keep talking about these things, and that's kind of where I stand on. I do the things that Kennedy's done over his life, the things that look at who am I thinking about? Andrew Wakefield. I talked to him recently, and he said, Brooke, maybe, come and meet these people, and maybe it'll be cathartic for you to be able to share your experience and listen to theirs. And I really didn't want to go because it's so depressing.
It is.
And it certainly wasn't, it certainly didn't do what he thought it would do. But again, I'm appreciative of their sacrifices, because that's what's happened. They've lost careers, people have lost homes, people, couldn't serve their country anymore because they just, didn't want to get it, or were fired, or, there's so much wrong with what happened. And I think one of the things that I think would support the Maha movement if there was some kind of accountability for the things that we know are true. We don't need more investigations on the origins of COVID. There have been plenty of those. What we need is some accountability, not pardons. We need sentences, jail sentences,
right,
and fines. With Pfizer, remember there not too long ago they received some kind of dumb like integrity award.
Yeah, that's
You
insane.
remember that? They were under a freaking corporate integrity agreement with the Department of Justice for their crimes. And then they get an award for
Well,
integrity?
It's obvious. I mean, your case explains why that's happening, because obviously this is not just, I mean, they're separate things, but there's an incestuous relationship here where we're watching this kind of fascistic blob become real, and whether it's technocratic or like the technology directions or medical health, it's very clear how these overlaps are just kind of merging together. And I'll include this, which I remember I pointed this out like every other day during the midst of the COVID illusion, which is, and funny enough, how it never seems to change, even though, and it only starts in the year 2000, which is more than before that, 107 different records on this violation tracker for Pfizer. I mean, and these are, and look, you know what, it's over $11 billion in fines. And the most important ones I point out are False Claims Act. 22 times they've been caught with false claims. You know, these things should matter, you know, but to your point, there's a relationship which protects them.
Not just a relationship, but you know, the media too, right? And that's kind of one of the things that's kind of revealed itself is just how complicit media is, journals are, you know, our own agencies, medical schools. I mean, it's and I guess here's another thing to be appreciative of is that that coming to light.
Yeah,
you know, because now I question everything.
Good.
And I also have a shirt that says that. Thank you, Ryan.
You're welcome.
You know, and that's kind of, you know, we're Bondi. I don't know if her prior legal services with Pfizer matter. Right. Maybe they don't in the grand scheme of things. But what we've learned over the last, you know, 5 years is that we can't allow any kind of conflicts of interest in government, period, right. Anywhere.
I mean, this obviously matters. I have it on the screen for the podcast of Pam Bondi and her different connections, and one of them being Pfizer. And there's probably more. I'll dig through this later. There's probably more that matters. I mean, the point to say is that this doesn't necessarily have to prove that there's some kind of a criminal act going on, but of course it matters, right? There's overlap to these companies, which means there could be more of an allegiance there. There could be, you know, more of a willing to ignore their problems. Maybe they have an offer for them after they come out of government, the whole revolving door, or maybe none of that. But it obviously matters, you know? And so the continuation of this, in my opinion, just shows that it's the same problem that never really stopped. The different people in different positions are continuing the same problem, as we just showed. That's just an indication of maybe why. You know, and I think we can see that Pfizer or Moderna or CureVac or all these different entities that are part of it, BioNTech, are all clearly on the same path. As I accidentally just showed, I'll just show it again since I brought it up, that Mary Talley Bowden, yeah, she put this out just showing, here's what Grok has to show you, that these are all the mRNA shots that are in the pipeline. You know, Moderna's got 48 of them. And that's not to say the government's involved with all of them. But I think we know that there are government contracts there, you know, even with the bird flu one that happened on the overlap to the Trump administration, right? And then they continued the funding and they added more. And now there's a bird flu shot, an mRNA platform, and they just rolled out another NIH. What was it? It's not coming up for me. It was the universal flu shot platform.
Oh, yeah.
I can try and grab that, but that just got reported.
They've been working on that for a really long time.
Exactly. You know, and that's what I said, is that this is not, maybe, and I honestly don't know, not to get off on a tangent here, but I don't know how you can have a platform without mRNA. I'm not the expert, but I wonder whether that's still part of it. They're not showing that, but either way, it's the same direction. Fauci was talking about a universal flu shot for the longest time. To me, it's the extension of the same problem, you know, which is what's so disconcerting, you know, because we did, you know, even as much as I don't think these people are different, I still had hope that it would be. You know, and I think we all should. So back to
the appointments, you know, with Jay Bhattacharya. I mean, I'm quite like, I know these are good men, you know, and they're smart, they're talented. They know how clinical trials are designed. They know how they're supposed to be run. I mean, they're scientists, they're medical doctors. So how can you call for, you know, a change in how vaccine trials are run, that they need to be compared to a placebo, a true placebo, an inert placebo, but then not talk about clinical trial data and not call out Pfizer for cheating in their trials, right. You know? And I hope that Marty Makary understands how data gets from a patient to a sponsor like Pfizer, over to the FDA, and then into a patient's arm. If you studied that process of data collection, he would understand that we should pause everything until we have an FDA investigative workforce, an inspection workforce that's able to verify and do clinical trial investigations of not just manufacturing sites, but data collection sites, where the data is actually coming from. Because if FDA doesn't get to the clinical trial sites and verify the data that Pfizer's using, then they'll tell you on their own website they're using and trusting the data that's coming from Pfizer. Why would you trust a company to provide you with accurate data, not fraudulent data, when you can look at their history?
Right.
I mean, why would the United States government contract through Operation Warp Speed with a company that was under a confidentiality agreement? Excuse me, not a confidentiality agreement. It was a, oh gosh, what was it? It was, they were, for being in trouble. It'll come to me in a second. I'll think of the name of it. But I mean, Pfizer was in trouble. A CIA, a corporate integrity agreement is what Pfizer was under for crimes. Why would the government want to contract with them to develop a vaccine to prevent to help end this pandemic? Why?
As you just showed, because they wanted the fraudulent. They ordered the fraud that they delivered, right? Because this is, same we were just saying before, is like you ask, like, I don't understand, and say clearly the point is that we don't want to believe that that's the reality, but it is, that they wanted to work with the group who's willing to be fraudulent. That's my opinion, but I think the evidence clearly shows that. And I would also argue, and I hope I'm wrong as always in this case, but the FDA is a captured agency as far as I'm concerned. So if we were going to have some real accountability, I argue we need to find a way to not, keep running through these same broken institutions, or at least somehow verify that it's not the same old broken thing. But I agree, that this is just one more step of this. It's the same problem that never really stopped, and it's, if we can't see that, or the continuation of the same shots, or the Stargate platform doing the same thing, it's a question of whether they're being played somehow or knowingly continuing the same problem. And I don't know how they could be missing the information. So to that point, I want your thoughts on that very thing. As Barnes pointed out, in his opinion anyway, he says a key set of saboteurs against Trump reside in the bowels of the Justice Department, where lefty attorneys undermine the Trump administration policies. And to overturn 2024 elections, DOJ filed a brief opposing Brook Jackson, claiming Biden policy to prevent accusations of fraud concerning COVID vaccine is still the policy when Trump admin publicly reversed that policy. Okay, so what are your thoughts on that before I comment?
No, well, I don't necessarily agree with Robert Barnes here, and he may have been able to contact people within the Justice Department, but I just, Trump is our commander in chief, so I don't want to think that anything gets past that man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, I think the concern for me is that this is the reactionary kind of benefit of the doubt, right? Which obviously that's certainly possible, right? There could be somebody, but this whole lefty holdover thing keeps being used for all these conversations, and yet we never see anyone arrested. We don't see any real point. No one gets called out, so I obviously possible. I'd like to see some names or some evidence to back that up. Otherwise it seems to be, anything that goes against what we want, we can just assume that it's not what he ordered because they want to believe that. And again, it could be, but I'm very worried about that because that allows people to ignore what we've been highlighting here, which is that this is, whether being tricked or not, the same problem continuing. And I mean, I find it hard to believe that makes sense with the Stargate platform, an mRNA cancer platform, or we could touch on, as we get done here, the MMR discussion, where RFK Jr. has now done a complete 180. And I do think it's not hard to understand. It's easy to see that things have shifted in regard to what he's saying. And then the argument becomes, well, he's playing some kind of a game and he's trying to keep strategy. The system going. And that goes back to the same point of Trump and the shot. Is I don't agree with that logic. I think that's immoral, if not dangerous, So if you have any more thoughts on that point, and if you think there's more there, otherwise let's talk about the kind of evolution of all the other points around this conversation, MMR, Stargate, anything else.
Yeah, I don't, I just don't understand. I don't understand how Kennedy could advocate for the things that he has for as long as he has, and allow these things to stay. And I don't think it's him. Again, I think that he's a good man, and maybe it's strategy, but I guess I don't like it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the important thing to highlight, is that this is wrong, right? So yes, the narrative could be what they're claiming, but let's not lose sight of the fact that we need to resist this. I also point out that I see a lot where people will make an argument like that to say, oh, well, it was an old, person left in the FBI. And then because of that, not call out that problem. It's like, well, hold on, no, we all agree that's a bad thing. Like, let's, but as if it's only important to hope that it's somebody else, instead of recognize we need to keep stopping the thing that's happening regardless.
Yeah. Remember when everybody on X was like, stop the shots until Kennedy's elected? I'm like, no, because I'm not going to stop saying anything.
Right.
That's true.
See, that's just integrity, Brooke. It's about consistency in your principles, and there's far too many and far too many good people, by the way, who have just been convinced by, I argue, partisan screamers out there on the team sport politics game, that they've been convinced that this is more, it's a lesser of evils. Like, we have to not talk about this because when he gets in, it'll be better in the long run. It's like, well, maybe, I'm not going to sacrifice my principles for your hopeful and, I argue, partisan driven perspective, but it's hard. But as you wrote here, Biden covered for Fauci, Trump covered for Pharma, 2 presidents, 0 accountability, right? So I think we can clearly see that this is an ongoing, we would agree. You wrote, don't ask why, ask how many. And this, I think this is a great point, Brooke. Since how many times since 2000, the U.S. government has dismissed pharmaceutical fraud cases? So just again, this nonpartisan, far back as you want to look, continuation of covering for Pharma.
How many times have I asked why today? I don't know. Like, you don't understand. You want to know why, but you already do. It's just what comes out of your mouth to explain how absurd this situation is. Exactly.
We just talked about Pam Bondi's connection, which is relevant. And you just tweeted about RFK Jr., but back from 2023, right? Where he said Donald Trump owned stock in Pfizer and J&J, who bought fancy tickets to his inauguration and placed pharma shills high in his administration. That's how Washington works. I think that's relevant to where we are right now, And then lastly, on this point, you said that as HHS and RFK Jr. are now the legal client of the DOJ on all PrEP Act, EUA, and vaccine related litigation, this means the DOJ represents him in court. He sets the policy. He decides whether PrEP Act shields stand or fall. He has the power to end the COVID emergency declaration today. That's an point that we don't focus on, right? No more excuses. So just kind of showing that the buck stops with him at this point. So
it does. And I think that I'm so glad that you pointed out. The DOJ is his client. They do what he says.
Right.
They're saying, Kennedy is saying that the burdens of this case are too much for the American people. That this lawsuit, which is about fraud, goes against public health policy. Make that make sense?
It's more legal arguments. I don't want to pull this into another conversation, but there's plenty of overlaps in the world today from this administration, again, just the U.S. government, that are continuing to make similar arguments where it's just too much of a burden. Well, it's not about whether it's a burden. It's about right and wrong, principles, integrity, constitutional rights. Like, you can't just make an excuse. We all made this point during COVID-19. Where you can't say, there's no asterisk on the Constitution. There's not saying, except when there's a pandemic, right? That's not how it works. But we're seeing a lot of these arguments continue, which it's not unique to left and right. I've seen Biden and Bush and Obama and everybody else do the same kind of thing in their context. And so I worry that we're falling for similar things. I did want your thoughts on the MMR shot in general. What do you think is a lot of people had the conversation about whether he's being blackmailed, which I can't find any evidence to back up, but wouldn't surprise me. What are your thoughts on the 180 on MMR shots, where seemingly telling us now and then it followed up again saying it's safe and effective, essentially?
I just don't know what to say to that other than somebody's got him.
Yeah. It wouldn't surprise me. I've had a really difficult time trying to reconcile that. And I'm not going to say I know. I wouldn't argue we can prove that, but his work has been profoundly important before this. And there was just this weird shift. And yes, it was after a very certain event. And I just think that it does seem like something happened there. But it's also possible that it was all a long-term ploy. I just don't think that adds up. So I think it's worth considering that. But either way, our point today has been the same, that it's still something we call out, regardless of who's driving or who's holding them, as you
We certainly do. I agree 100%. We don't know what's going on behind closed doors.
Yeah.
I just know what his stance has been for his whole almost adult life. I know that he's a brilliant attorney.
Mm-hmm.
I've read his briefs. I know the MMR case very well. He said just recently that there was a False Claims Act case against Merck for what they did in the clinical trial. They rigged the clinical trial. And he didn't say that. He said it was dismissed on a technicality. Well, that technicality is that the government knew about the fraud, but chose to purchase it anyway.
Right.
I mean, it's insane. In all these cases, it doesn't take, I don't know if you like using AI or you don't, but a quick Google search or whatever your favorite search engine is, all you have to do is type in False Claims Act cases, pharmaceuticals, and you can do your own research. And I encourage people to do that. It's not hard to look these things up, but the government has been doing this for a long time. This Pfizer case, the Merck case, there have been many False Claims Act cases against pharmaceuticals where there's alleged fraud in the clinical trial and the government says, get rid of it.
Yeah, right. Which I was say the same point as before, is that just very important to see the long-term linear. It's not left and right in all this. And that's the point that really matters. It's just, this is something that needs to stop. And every single time of a change of the guard, people make up new arguments for why something will be different. And I'm all with the hope. I hope that's going to happen, but I'm more critical than ever. But then things happen the same. And then there's a narrative built around why it's not the same thing or why it'll end a different way, and again, I hope so, but we can see it hasn't really stopped. And so this is the largest problem, is that we're coming to a point where these things are intersecting with much larger problems, or I should say much larger, just different, like the technological advancements that I think will apply to this, that make this possibly already even there, that really terrify me, so people need to stand up and put their foot down and stop, ignore for the moment the people that you think you're following or believe in, and just focus on the policy and the integrity and the principle of it all. And I think it's pretty clear that this is a problem. And I'd like to end with talking about the gain of function point, because I think this is a really interesting, and this is just recent, as of yesterday to today, which is another example of something that we all championed by, I would say more so than anybody, the right of the conversation, right? Calling out the problems around this, calling out gain of function, Pfizer, COVID-19, and are now with this administration continuing, just like Biden did and everyone before them, I argue the same problem under a guise of something else. And this is what Tom Renz put out, saying Trump allows gain of function research to continue, but in certain aspects, when the framing is out as if this is stopping gain of function. Now, give me your thoughts on that. I know we're not going deep on this. I've only just been reading about it today. Do you have any perspective on that?
Well, I use X as kind of like my diary almost. And I don't know if you caught the little pardon me joke there, but I follow Emily Kopp, and she's the one that actually pointed me to this. And so you go look at the executive order, you read it, and then you compare it to what was in place in 2017 and what has actually changed. Mm-hmm. Not a lot. Right. So I wish people, and I'm guilty of this myself too, I get excited when I see something that, it means something to me. You just want to go repost it quickly to let people know. But I encourage people to read the executive order. And once this administration finally puts out what these changes in policy are going to look like, because it's just a tease right now. They haven't spelled that out for us yet. But in what I've read, there isn't much change. What I would have liked to see right away, just going, based on the most recent disaster with gain of function, is what happened with COVID. Mm-hmm. How about we not allow people that participate in these activities, whether it's on our soil or not, that we find some way to hold them accountable, but especially if they're on our soil. Why did Fauci get a pardon? I mean, he's to me just, the most evil person out there, but why did he get a pardon? Why did the American taxpayer dollar have to pay millions? American taxpayer have to pay millions of dollars for his personal chauffeur service and his security? Like, why are we protecting him?
Yeah, right. It's an important question.
He's responsible for part of this. So I would have liked to see some stronger language, some enforcement mechanism within that executive order to hold people accountable for the things that they say are not allowed anymore, or little tweaks that they've made here and there. So anyway.
Well, there's important points to add is that ultimately, let's remember that the last time, which went through both administrations, in the recent memory, where they said they were stopping and they didn't. We can prove that, right? So let's just be clear, just because they say these things or, actually sign an executive order as opposed to legislation, by the way, which is always the way this is going to go. So it's not really applicable to the world or even more than the executive branch, which is how they actually work. They could just lie about that. But secondarily, let's not forget that even Fauci tried to roll out the whole EEE or EPPP, like the new name for it. And so how we know they're not going to use that
function use. That's exactly. There are loopholes within what we've been shown that will allow the same thing to continue, is my point.
Exactly. And as you rightly pointed out, here's one thing that concerns me, referencing what Tom Rentz was highlighting. The new executive order does ban civilian funding for dangerous bioresearch unless it's for war games. So even that alone could just be, well, that's every time they do it now will be called a war game. It's easy to see how this can apply.
That's no change. That's always been allowed. Just
exactly.
But, it kind of feeds into how the Department of Defense use this prototype contract with, Pfizer to get their product. It is the vaccine. Mm-hmm. So they were able to use these kind of carve outs to, direct their weapon at the people. Right. It's just mind blowing.
I know.
And I wish I had, all the time in the world to sit down and access to data that I'm certain that they've scrubbed, right? Even since.
That's my concern about the Stargate, or just one of the different overlaps. Because let's not forget that included Larry Ellison, right? Who Oracle was overlapped with COVID-19 and Moncef Slaoui and the pharmacovigilance. And there's a whole database that they promised wouldn't be used exactly like this. And now it's being used exactly like this, which is the point, is that ultimately that was data we never got to see. Right, that was a whole different thing where Moncef Slaoui under the original warp speed said they would follow people for up to 2 years for pharmacovigilance if they took the shot, and that we never got to see that as far as I can tell. And so now it's being overlapped with this, and obviously with SoftBank and AI, Sam Altman, and everything else. But I'm worried about how that overlap continues, and really just shows you this dovetail with the technocratic direction. And I think it's important to highlight, as we just said, plenty more mRNA shots coming out. She also pointed out 2024 to 2045. This is Mary Talley Bowden. COVID shots for ages 6 months to 11 years are authorized under emergency use authorization by the US FDA, not fully licensed, yet are on the CDC pediatric schedule. Now, we got a lot of talk about shifting things. You mentioned the placebo thing. There's a lot of things being stated. I don't see any actual material changes in earnest just yet. I really hope we see them. I do think some of them will probably happen to one degree or another, but I think it's important that we hold back our cheering until we actually see these things materialize. Because even the placebo point, that's been going on a long time, and I don't necessarily see it begin to take place. But just on as wrap up to end,
they haven't even come out with their policy, Ryan. Like they're just saying that they're going to do this. That's not been written out anywhere. Mm-hmm. So what does that look like? Is that only going to apply to new vaccines? Is that going to apply to, everything else that's on the childhood and adult immunization schedules?
Good point.
That's another thing that I just want to point out really quickly. We can call for, a ban on these mRNA products for our children. And I think that's super important. Absolutely. But we know that it's injuring and killing people. So why would we just recall it for kids? What about who's going to take care of these kids when their parents get shots and are killed or injured? Or, we just have to do what we know is the right thing, what's required by law. And that's kind of, sorry, I just wanted to point that out really quickly.
I agree.
Of course, we worry about the babies, yes, but we adults matter too.
Well, it comes down to a principle. I mean, again, it's the same point. If you're aware of the real problem, there's no world in which you would allow that to continue to be used. And especially getting into all the deeper points that the average person has no idea about, I would argue, about whether, any number of very crazy topics we can get into around the overlap of these shots, but just even the basic peer-reviewed science at this point. I mean, we can clearly see that these things, let's not even remotely benefits outweigh the risks. Like, it's shockingly to the other side. And I mean, frankly, my opinion, the evidence shows that there's not even remotely effective, and whatever that even actually means, unless the effectiveness is what they're designed to do, which is hurt people. Because so you can't pretend like we can just let that continue, because that is the very problem. And, this is how it goes back and forth, and the things continue down in the same path. And I think that what we can see is that the same thing is going forward, the same schedule, a lot of, like you said, statements about things that I really do hope come to pass. Or, for example, on the placebo point, like, what about if they do what they've always done, which is, we'll use a placebo, but we'll use a meningitis vaccine, in a way that makes it clearly seem as if there's a less disparity between saline and something else. Now, that they argue those are placebos in the conversation. We have to wait to see things actually happen before we start making these claims. But
just one more time, you can make all these changes to the design of clinical trials, but FDA needs to get out to the clinical trial sites and do their job and enforce, get these inspectors out to the sites to verify the data. Otherwise, it's just a rigged placebo-controlled trial.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because I was going to say this before. The point that's important there is that, yes, you can have all this conversation about every part of the process, but if they're simply relying to begin with on data that could be fraudulent, then everything else doesn't matter. Like, that's the core of it, or at least at the very least, it could be manipulated. And this has been your whole point from the very beginning, and it's why, again, I think your work is profoundly important in this conversation, or just in a health-focused conversation in general. I hope people.
That's because, I focus on that. That's kind of what affected me personally. And I just, find your space, man, whatever it is, whatever's important to you, stay focused there, but take the time to learn about these different areas of concern, and keep doing what you're doing to get the information out. We do reach people, and if I just reach one a day, if somebody's like, what, that's crazy, I didn't know that. To me, I feel like I've done my job, because I don't really have one anymore, because Pfizer got me fired.
Right. Well, I agree completely. And I think that's the best way to look at this. And obviously I think we're reaching way more than that, but I agree with you is that, just that if you change one person's mind, you don't know how that will cascade through the future.
I actually don't even want to change your mind. I just want to inform you of what's actually happening.
I'm glad you said that, because I completely agree. It's not about, the way I mean that is ultimately give you information to potentially change the way you see things. But I agree. It's not about that we want you to think the way I think. It's just, if we can influence with facts more people every day, that will most definitely change things. And they tell their friends, and they grow up and they tell their family, it's profound. So thank you for saying that. And, I think it's important that people support your work, to reach out and I'll include everything we discussed today, including, I'll show you afterward. I was going to show you something, and I'll include your links here for people to check you out, and just please support her work, because she is doing amazing things out there. Anything else you want to leave us with before we take off today? Any updates or things coming up in the future?
Oh, well, we do have our reply brief due in just a few weeks. We'll likely request an extension, so it may be a month, maybe more, before we're able to get that filed with the circuit court, or the appellate court. But I have fun coming on here. I appreciate the opportunity to give an update, and thank you for doing what you do and getting the information to the people so that they can make an informed decision. And I love your saying, question everything. That's so important to me. And, one of my friends on X told me a long time ago, trust no one. So I trust no one, and I question everything. So I appreciate that for sure.
Well, thank you. And, I consider you a friend, Brooke, and I'm glad you came back on, and let's connect again in the future, because I don't think this is going to get less important as time goes on. So let's stay in touch. And as always, everyone out there, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
We should be having a public dialogue, and it should be something that rises to the level of legislation. We should not allow the National Institutes of Health or the Department of Defense to allocate funding to amplify these agents so that allegedly we can study them in the case that they fall into the hands of bad people. Because the evidence has shown us that the bad people who actually have unleashed these pathogens since 1991, and by the way, if you go to miscellaneous memorandum 7 and other documents, we can go back to the 1950s. The bad people who unleash these things on the population are us. It is the U.S. who's doing it.